Good evening and thanks for joining us. The city reported 747 new COVID-19 cases today, the third day in a row that the daily case count has dropped below 1,000. Kip Long has details.
Among the 747 new COVID infections reported today, all but 11 were locally acquired. Among the 736 local cases, 436 were confirmed by PCR tests and 300 were detected by rapid antigen tests. The hospital authority says so far there have been 15 cases of children developing multi-system inflammatory syndrome after recovering from COVID.
It could be that the viral infection triggered such a problem in the immune system. This condition happens within a few weeks or months after the recovery. Some children experience very serious condition and require intensive care. So parents pay attention to the recovery of their children. If their children feel unwell, take your children to a doctor.
Meanwhile, 24 COVID patients in public hospitals aged between 55 and 105 passed away yesterday. The city's fifth wave of COVID-19 has so far claimed 8,926 lives. On the third day of the Easter long weekend, the police continued to patrol areas such as Chater Road in Central and Victoria Park to enforce social distancing rules. Some tickets were issued, but officers mostly issued reminders and warnings instead. A lot of people also flocked to the West Kowloon Cultural District today, and gatherings of more than 10 people could sometimes be seen. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
A resumption of in-person classes for primary students and the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education examination will both take place within this coming week. Are authorities and schools well prepared to deal with the students' daily COVID tests, among other pandemic-related ad hoc arrangements? We spoke with the education chief to find out. In 2 days, primary schools could resume half-day in-person classes. Speaking to TVB News, Secretary for Education Kevin Yeung says most primary schools opt to reopen their campus on the 25th instead, beginning with primary 4 to 6 students. Then every morning, schools will have to submit an overview of their students' COVID test results to the Center for Health Protection. Are the schools and health authorities well prepared to handle the swaths of data?
We are talking about 2,000 schools, including the kindergartens. The information will be relatively simple. It's how many students are there in your school and how many have reported a positive test result and a percentage. So basically, it's not a very complicated.
If there are reports of isolated cases, schools can continue operating. While there isn't a cut-and-dried school suspension mechanism, Yeung says an infection rate of around 5% would prompt authorities to see if there's an outbreak within school.
We would not say that it is an absolute number, but it is a sort of a trickling point. If over a number of days it's approaching 5%, or 4.7, 4.6, 4.8, something like that, then maybe CHP could have a look.
The education chief says it's unlikely students would try to submit a fake rapid antigen test result. Full-day in-person classes are possible only if the vaccination rate among primary students surpasses 90%, with a largely improved pandemic situation, Yeung adds. For the Diploma of Secondary Education examination set to begin next Friday, COVID-infected candidates or those under quarantine can also choose to sit the exam in the special center in Penny's Bay. They have to call the government's hotline for pickup services between 6 and 6:30 a.m. Will that half-hour window be too much of a rush?
We have go through the operation and find that it only takes a few minutes to drop down the address, the student's name, address, and things.
But if students miss the 6:30 cutoff time, Yeung says the government will still try and accommodate their requests. 3 Chinese-made Omicron-targeting COVID vaccine candidates have been approved for clinical trials in Hong Kong. 2 of them are expected to be available for use by the end of this year. But the vaccines are not developed based on the most prevalent BA.2 Omicron strain. Timothy Lee reports.
As data indicates, antibodies elicited by vaccines based on older strains are weaker to neutralize the highly transmissible Omicron variant. So scientists worldwide are racing to upgrade vaccine capability. Among them are 2 new possible vaccines developed by a Sinopharm subsidiary and 1 more by Sinovac. For the Sinopharm vaccines, it contains inactivated or killed Omicron virus similar to the vaccines currently in use in China. 1,800 adults will participate in the 6-month experiment. Beginning next month, the jabs will be tested as boosters for their side effects, antibody levels, and prevention rates on mortality and severe illness. Participants should have been double or triple jabbed with either Sinovac or BioNTech doses. There will be a control group being vaccinated with the primitive virus inactivated jabs. A similar study for Sinovac's Omicron vaccine, but only 300 participants will be recruited. HKU epidemiologist Ivan Hung, who will be part of the research team, says Sinovac will need 1 more larger-scale trial before the vaccine is rolled out to the market. All 3 vaccine possibles are developed based on subvariant BA1 instead of BA2, the most common subvariant among Hong Kong COVID patients. Hung says they should yield similar levels of protection as they all share properties of the Omicron strain. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The mainland reported some 26,000 COVID cases, with 95% of them located in heavy-hit Shanghai. Among some 24,000 local infections reported in the megacity, more than 21,000 of the patients are asymptomatic. All but 1 of the 16 critically ill patients are unvaccinated. Vice Premier Sun Chenglan, who has been directing the anti-epidemic effort in Shanghai, said there is a need to let the public fully understand the city's anti-epidemic policy and have them fully support it. In Guangdong province, 40 cases have been reported, with 27 coming from Guangzhou. Meanwhile, South Korea reported just over 93,000 new COVID infections yesterday. That's the first time in 6 days that the figure fell below the 100,000 mark. This comes as the country is due to scrap most pandemic restrictions tomorrow. Authorities will remove a 10-person limit on private gatherings and lift a midnight curfew for restaurants and cafes. Large political rallies and other events involving 300 or more people will also be allowed, but the mask-wearing requirement in indoor public places remains. Omicron has forced South Korea to abandon a stringent COVID response based on mass laboratory tests, aggressive contact tracing, and quarantines. Authorities have instead focused its limited medical resources on high-risk groups. They include those aged 60 or above and people with pre-existing medical conditions. A Russian missile attack has damaged infrastructure in Brovary, a city near the Ukraine capital, Kyiv. It's the latest in attacks near Kyiv since the sinking of the flagship of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, and it's a deadline passed for Ukrainian forces to surrender in Mariupol. Matthew Bray reports.
The deadline for Ukrainian forces to lay down arms in Mariupol has passed, but so far, as reports suggest, Russia does not have full control of the strategic port on the Sea of Azov. The remaining Ukraine Marines, other brigades and the Azov Regiment are inside the Azov-style steel plant, a fortress-like structure covering 11 square kilometers. Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky described the situation as difficult, but said the soldiers are defending themselves despite being blocked. He again appealed for more heavy weaponry and planes, but that has not been forthcoming so far, or he wants a diplomatic way out. On Saturday, Zelensky awarded medals to military communications personnel at an undisclosed location. He noted that Ukraine has had almost uninterrupted connection with the West since the war broke out. Russian shelling of civilian areas with rockets continued in Kharkiv, the second largest city in the northeast. At this residential area, 1 person was killed outright and 31 others wounded. 2 more later died in hospital from injuries sustained. In Sloviansk, 15 kilometers from heavily shelled Kramatorsk, a woman and her daughter waited for a vehicle to take them to Rivne in western Ukraine. This region has been hit by Russian fire repeatedly since Thursday. 1 hour from Kramatorsk in Lysychansk, Russians have been targeting factories and an oil refinery. The regional governor in Lugansk accused the Russians of trying to exhaust local emergency services. The latest defense briefing from Moscow had the spokesman saying A Ukraine military cargo plane had been shot down near Odessa, and that nearly 1,500 Ukraine servicemen had surrendered in Mariupol with 4,000 dead. Neither is verifiable, and neither is this really either. This is said to be Admiral Nikolai Yevmenov meeting what's left of the 500-plus crew of the Russian Black Sea flagship Moskva in Sevastopol. Russia claims the vessel sank after an ammunition explosion. Ukraine said it hit the ship with 2 Neptune missiles. Matthew Bray, TVB News.
France has been gripped with political fervor this weekend, with the country's presidential runoff election set to get underway on April 24th. Incumbent leader Emmanuel Macron will take on his far-right counterpart, Marine Le Pen, as he bids to remain in office. Demonstrations against Le Pen have been taking place across France as Macron sought to drum up support in Marseille. Daniel Rao tells us more.
Thousands of people gathered in central Paris on Saturday to protest against French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen. They chanted anti-far-right slogans and warned of potential threats to the country's democracy if Le Pen claimed victory. Some held banners bearing messages such as against the far right, for justice and equality, not Le Pen and the Élysée. This in reference to the Champs-Élysées, the French president's official residence. Police briefly used tear gas in a bid to disperse the crowds, but this did not appear to deter them. Anti-Le Pen demonstrators convened in 30 other French cities. That prompted police to warn of possible further disruptions or violence. The demonstrations come as incumbent leader Emmanuel Macron sits slightly ahead in opinion polls before April 24th's presidential runoff election. With Paris awash with protests, Macron headed to Marseille on the Mediterranean coast. There, he held a rally aiming to convince voters in the traditionally left-leaning city to back him and keep Le Pen out of office. Le Pen, meanwhile, is also touring the south of the country. She criticized protests against her as undemocratic, saying the French political establishment is worried about her potential victory. Le Pen holds an anti-immigration political stance and is a longtime critic of the European Union. In recent years, she has attempted to revamp the image of her National Rally party in a bid to entice more moderate voters. Her 2022 campaign has focused on addressing France's soaring cost of living. That's in addition to tapping into the belief from some quarters that Macron is unaware of the everyday hardships faced by low-income families in the country. Macron has centered his campaign on addressing unemployment. Daniel Rowell, TVB News.
As Chief Executive hopeful John Lee continues to work on his campaign platform, he met with lawmakers during an exchange session held online today. During the meeting, Legislative Council President Andrew Leung said he believes Lee is a man of aspiration and wisdom. Leung hopes the new CE can have more exchanges with electoral members. Meanwhile, John Lee said he will consider reforming the civil service system if he is elected. Many lawmakers expressed their support. Former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying said Hong Kongers who have left the city are not leaving for good, but have just relocated to other countries. Yeah. Speaking on the radio program, Leung said some of those who haven't given up their SAR passports or ID cards will still return to the SAR if Hong Kong resolves its political issues. That could be done through beefing up education on the basic law and showing Hong Kong's unique strength financially and legally alongside the mainland, he said. Leung also said the one country, two systems principle has worked over the past 25 years, but some problems arose over the concept of Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong. The vice chairman of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference cited examples of some former lawmakers asking for sanctions on the SAR. And that's the news. Thank you for watching.